All right, Ernie, I think we are live. If not, we're pretty darn close to getting live. So today's topic, the party is over, folks. It is over. And of course, we're talking about how to get squatters out of a house, especially for a probate lead. The party's over, and you'll find out what I mean about that later on. But for how can you help out, the family in probate when they have a squatter living in their house? Right, a situation, and it's tough, it's difficult because there's a lot of different scenarios here. That I'm going to turn it over to Ernie Vargas. Ernie Vargas, the probate fox, Rob Badhorn, Lead Fusion here, if I forgot to mention our names. Ernie, what is the problem with the squatter being in a probate house, right? How do you help the family out?
Yeah, a lot of our sellers that are going through probate oftentimes have the unfortunate circumstance to face an unwanted occupant, and that person could be either a squatter. It could be, a squatter who overstayed, themselves. It could be somebody who just, you know, came in and broke into a property and decided that they should live in it rent free. Whatever that reason may be, at the end of the day, you have an unwanted person in that house. And unfortunately, people don't find out about this person or family or a bunch of people until, they are going through the probate paperwork. And so it's something that often happens when I'm talking to my sellers. I go by and I look at a property, and lo and behold, that, I knock on the door and supposed to be vacant, somebody's in there. And so what I like to do is I like to walk alongside of my people that are going through probate, my executors and my administrators, and I really like to put my expert hat on, and that's what I recommend that our audience does as well. Because see, what happens is that most of these folks have a real estate probate attorney, rather, not a real estate attorney, but a probate attorney. And a probate attorney is very, very different. That job description is very, very different than a real estate specialist. Mm-hmm. And so their job description does not include, evicting a squatter or negotiating, a squatter to be relocated or removed from that property. And oftentimes, these squatters are people that, say, for example, you have a 40-year-old adult son who lived with mom. He just never grew up, chose to, live rent free without a job. And, he's kind of like the black sheep of the family, right? I think many
Could
people,
be, yeah, very well, yeah.
right. And so now, mom passes away, and all the adult siblings say, hey, it's time to go. It's time to go. I mean, here's an asset, yes, but it's wrapped in it as a liability with all of these expenses that have to be paid, and taxes and maintenance and so forth.
Electricity.
And so,
yeah.
What I find is that these attorneys just, that is not their expertise. But guess what? We are, and that's where we come in. And so whether we bring forth the right attorney to help them with that portion, which has nothing to do with probate again, or if we ourselves, and this is something that I like to do, is I like to come in and have a conversation with these occupants and say, hey guys, what's going on, right? Why are they there? So one, we want to identify who is taking possession of that house, who that occupant is. That's number one. What kind of a squatter is that person or an occupant? And then number two is, what's it going to take to, really get them out? Money talks, right? It could be money. It could be giving them an extended stay in that property rent free. And as much as nobody likes it, that may be what's best for everybody. But we won't know until we come with the sound mind to have that conversation with these people. And, this is a great value that you can bring to your probate estates because, the poor sellers, they don't know any better. They're not real estate experts. This is not what they do day in and day out. And oftentimes these folks live out of state or out of the area. And so, that's an opportunity for us to come in and shine and be a support to the estate, the heirs, the attorney, everybody all the way around. And guess what? What does that mean? That means that at the end of the day, the one that really brings support and help and what's in it for them, the executives and administrators is the one that gets the deal. And that's why we get more and more deals and our students get more and more deals. Our probate list, for example, includes so many things. Rob, you want to share about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, the leads that we actually generate, and they obviously include the decedent, who is skip traced as well, the petitioner, the attorney, if it's available, on the case, we get that information, and then we add relatives as well, which their addresses, their phone numbers, and emails, so you can get a hold of the extended family if the petitioner doesn't, for instance, know about it. In terms of inheritance leads that we're doing coming up, we'll do relatives as well. So that's going to be super critical in those leads. So if you're getting an inheritance lead without relatives, you're just trying to get a hold of something there that the decedent passed away. That's tough. There's not really anybody named in the trust or anything like that. That relatives are going to be really handy moving forward. But I want to get back to something that you said earlier, Ernie, and that's really about helping out the family. There's different scenarios that when someone's in the house, it could be something that they lease the property, right? So it could be a lessor, in that case. And have they been paying rent? Do you need to eviction? Do you need to do cash for keys? All those scenarios. As a real estate investor, all these different avenues and methods and tools that you can do to help out. If it's a relative, you mentioned that as well. You could play the bad guy here, right? You could go in and say, hey, I'm buying the house, and it's nice, that mom afforded you to stay here for the last, 10 years, but I'm buying it and I don't want you in it. Right. So how do you work that out with that person, in the property, talking to them, like you said, sitting down with them,
Right.
or you might just have a squatter, right? And in that case, what
right.
happens?
And obviously this is where you want to be familiar with your local rules and regulations of your particular county, because every county is different. How we work with these occupants and what legal rights they have. But even if it's a place like, say, for example, let's take an extreme case, California, right? Even if it's like Los Angeles, California, and we have all the rules and laws in place to help the occupant, even if they are a squatter instead of the homeowner, right? Or the estate in this case. There are still ways to help people, right? And it starts with communication. But guess what? At the very beginning of it all is having that probate file in your hand. And that's first and foremost. You've got to have that probate file in your hand so that you know what you're working with. You know exactly who the heirs are. Who the decedent is. If any of those names of these potential relatives match the squatter. Do they have any other rights? But there's so many different things that you can do for these people in probate, especially right now during COVID. I will say that people are in need of money. And the reality is that a lot of these folks that inherit houses, they're out of state, they're out of the area, they don't really have a means to go over to where the subject property is.
They don't have anybody on the street, locally, like to help them out, right? And you can
exactly. So a lot of opportunity to serve, a lot of opportunity to make a lot of money, and to be a lot of help.
I agree. So just to wrap up here, like I said, the theme of this whole video is the party's over, right? If there's a relative in the house and they need to move out, you're that conduit to help move that person out, help them move that person out for the family that might be off into another state or whatever. So, and again, the realtor and the attorney is really not responsible for doing that. So as a real estate investor, you have that toolbox, cash for keys, whatever, the local laws that can really help out that person and help out that family, the petitioner to really get that person out of the property. So again, thank you very much, Ernie. I know we mentioned our leads during here, but we do offer national probate leads, inheritance right around the corner. And of course, those are fully skip traced. So you have the ability to get a hold of these people by email, phones, mailing address, whatever you need in order to get a hold of those folks. So if you could do a huge favor, like and share us in Facebook, please share the video. We'd really appreciate it. Go subscribe to our YouTube channel. The links are in this podcast or this video here that we're doing on Facebook and YouTube. Really appreciate that. We're trying to get our subscriber count up and go from there. Ernie, any closing thoughts?
Just go out and get it. Serve a lot of people and have a lot of money. Don't let COVID stop you. There's so many people that are urgently in need of your help. I mean, I just got off of a call this morning with a few folks, and boy, the need is big. The need is big.
No doubt. And our next topic for next week, I think, is even bigger, and going to help people out. So stay tuned for next week. Hot topic. And like and subscribe us, follow us so you get alerted to when that's coming up. All right. Thanks a lot, Ernie. Really appreciate it. And have a great day. We'll talk to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right.